Hello and welcome to Blog Tornado. How are you today? And today we're going to talk about some exciting news. Ladies and gentlemen, and all the extraterrestrial life in outer space, Half-Life is back, which proves we are not alone in the universe, especially if you're an alien. So I'm a big fan of Half-Life. I'm a huge fan of Half-Life, and I also played it on a Dreamcast and Counter-Strike, but Half-Life 2 episode stole my heart, and I have to say it's probably one of the best games ever made, and of course next to Halo. However, today, since the announcement of Half-Life VR, Alyx, we're going to talk a little bit about Half-Life, and stay with me a little bit so we can talk a little bit more about Bob Lazar as well and Half-Life. And yeah, wow, it's a VR, it's Oculus Rift, it's not on PlayStation 4 VR. However, just amazing. It's a mixture of reality and sci-fi, which is perfectly balanced in that game. That's just amazing news at the moment. Wow. Just blows my mind. And this is VR. The graphics look very familiar. They didn't change anything in there that would make it look like what Halo usually does, and sometimes they just change the look of the game, the whole feel of the game. And it looks like a Half-Life episode 2. The graphics are beefed up. It looks like they're on steroids, but it still looks like Half-Life 2, and you're not losing anything. They're just adding on top of the Half-Life 2, which is amazing. This is very well done. Just from the look of it, the graphics are amazing. They look very realistic, and it brings you back those feelings you used to have. I'm sure that Oculus Rift sales are just gonna skyrocket. There's no escape from Half-Life VR, Alyx, I'm quite sure. But the question is, how long is this game? As you know that a lot of VR games are short, maybe half an hour or less, but they know that this is Half-Life. It's a different story here. So if it's a long game, that would be really good. I can imagine once you put the Oculus Rift on, that's it. You're gone. You're gonna be staying in that world for a while. So that's definitely exciting news, and to say the least, wow, I'm just shocked. Well, let's move on to Bob Lazar. I know we talked about that before, but today I want to point out another problem that seems to be that showed up in one of his documentaries that I kind of tie in with the situation. Because again, let's recap. Obviously, Bob Lazar is not telling us lies, so he definitely saw what he saw was real. That's a fact. But where the problem happens is that what he actually saw were prototypes that S4 was working on, or military was working on. And that explains the reason why they were 9, okay? And why they were all different shapes, okay? He mentioned that himself. So that explains the fact that, of course, if you're making something like a UFO, you might want to try out a few different prototypes and see which one, works better. And that's important. That's just part of any kind of project. So that explains the fact why they were 9, because each and every one of those UFOs has a different aerodynamics, and that once you find out which one works the best, then you go with that particular model. So he saw what he saw, and it was real. And this is where the problem happens. This is where he might get caught, okay? He knows probably that those UFOs, since he was inside the S4, so he probably knows that those UFOs were actually prototypes. That's why military let him go, because there was no reason to hide anything. There was nothing to hide. because they were prototypes. The UFOs were prototypes. So what's the point of... so there was no reason to hold him back or whatnot. So, but what happened, Bob Lazar took that story and converted it into a true story. And this is the thing, he doesn't want to admit that, because why? He would lose the credibility, the popularity, and he will no longer be a rock star in the UFO world. And why would he do that and tell people that those were prototypes? So, I mean, why do that? Obviously, he ran with the story and, and pointed it towards his direction. And that's what really happened there. So that's why I believe he knows that those UFOs were prototypes, except he doesn't want to admit it because he wants to get some fame out of this. And as you know, he did, right? So that explains the whole situation. I'm quite sure that's what happened. You have to understand, to have such possession of 9 UFOs will be highly unlikely, especially in that quantity. And I'm sure that aliens are not just going to let someone have their vehicles of such. I mean, it's just, I'm sure they're more intelligent than that. Unless, they get pulled in from outer space towards the Earth because of the gravity, and maybe they cannot escape, but I highly doubt it that they cannot escape. So it's just a thought that maybe could be the reason why the UFOs are getting caught, just like asteroids are being constantly pulled in because of the gravity. And of course, because of the atmosphere, they don't make it to the Earth, and most of the time we can't see them because of the atmosphere. They burn in the atmosphere. But so there is another important clue that other videos don't have. And stay with me here, please. And don't think I forgot about Half-Life, because it's still in my head while I'm talking about Bob Lazar. The vital piece of information that Bob Lazar wants popularity and fame out of this story is basically because in one of the documentaries I can see he's driving a red Corvette. A red Corvette, it's a sport car, obviously, and anybody that prefers that kind of style of cars, you have to understand it's mostly for show-off reasons. And as you know, if you have a sport car, if you have one yourself, you understand it draws a lot of attention. So that kind of gives me a little bit more clue that perhaps he wants the attention, and that's the sort of person he might be, his personality. And that explains why he didn't, admit that the story. He didn't admit why those 9 UFOs were only prototypes. So he just went ahead and covered that up and turned it into a true story instead. So now you know why, because of popularity. So that's something new that regarding Corvette, and not just that, but it's a hydrogen car on top of that. And that explains his scientific background, but it doesn't, his personality has nothing to do with his scientific abilities, because, still, that Corvette sort of tells me about what his personality is like, what he likes. So it seems like it's something that grabs attention, okay? So, which ties into why, he didn't want to admit the story is actually fake, and he covered it up by making it true and covered up the truth about UFOs being a prototype. And that's why I think this mystery around the story is being decoded for that very reason. And again, why did they let him go? Is because there was nothing to hide, okay? So that explains the problem there, because as you know, if they did have something to hide, he wouldn't be just let go like that, especially, if it's US military we're talking about here, because they have to understand what's going to happen. I'm sure they have some idea in their head that this man is going to run into the wild with the story. So as you know, as you can see, it happened. Maybe they just didn't expect that he's going to convert that story into a true story. They didn't think that far down the road. But so the pressure is growing around the world about this mystery, and public is getting curious if this is a true story or not. As you know, with Storm Area 51 gathering that happened, and as you can see, I'm sure Bob Lazar is responsible for a lot of that. So there you have it. That's my 2 cents as far as that goes. But something to keep in mind, because we have to ask these questions. Why? So we don't look like fools, okay? And, if the story is true, and if Bob Lazar is watching this particular video and many other videos about him, and if he's laughing his ass off right now, then yep, his story is true. Just like the news about Half-Life is true. So, yep, if you like this video, please subscribe down at the bottom right. If you have something to comment, that would be great. Give it a thumbs up. Perfect. And I have a link below for you as far as Half-Life goes, Half-Life VR Alyx. And I hope you enjoyed the trailer if you haven't seen it already. Take care. Cheers.